The McDonnell F2H Banshee was a single-seat carrier-based jet fighter aircraft deployed by the United States Navy and United States Marine Corps from 1948 to 1961. It was one of the primary American fighters used during the Korean War and was the only jet-powered fighter ever deployed by the Royal Canadian Navy, serving the RCN from 1955 until 1962. The aircraft's name is derived from the Banshee of Celtic mythology. Design and development: the Banshee was a development of the FH Phantom, although it was being planned before the Phantom went into production. McDonnell engineers originally intended the aircraft to be a modified Phantom that shared many parts with the earlier aircraft, but it soon became clear that the need for heavier armament, greater internal fuel capacity, and other improvements would make the idea unfeasible. The new aircraft would use much larger and more powerful engines, a pair of newly developed Westinghouse J-34 turbojets, raising power from the J-30's 1,600-pound forces to 3,000-pound forces each. Since the larger engines had to fit within the wing roots, this required a larger and thicker wing with a span of 41 feet 6 in rather than the Phantom unregistered trademark S span of 40 feet 0 in. The more powerful engines also used more fuel, so the fuselage was enlarged and strengthened to increase fuel capacity. Navy leaders decided to move away from the World War II standard .50 caliber machine gun to 20 mm cannon. 4 of the guns were mounted low on the nose to prevent pilots from being blinded by muzzle flash when firing the guns at night, a problem that vexed the Phantom with its top-mounted guns. The Banshee was designed to accommodate an ejection seat, a capability the Phantom lacked, and it incorporated a large number of improvements to other aircraft systems. The cockpit was fully pressurized and air-conditioned, and the flaps, landing gear, folding wings, canopy, and air brakes were electrically operated rather than pneumatically operated. The front of the canopy was made of bulletproof glass that was electrically heated to prevent frost. The aircraft incorporated a novel design feature, a nose landing gear consisting of a pair of very small wheels forward of the regular nose wheel. The nose wheel could be retracted so the aircraft rested on the smaller wheels, allowing it to taxi with its tail high in the air. This was intended to ease hangering and enhance safety by directing the hot jet blast upwards while taxiing. The feature was found to be of little use operationally, however, and was omitted from later Banshee variants. A mock-up of the new fighter, originally designated XF-2D1, was completed in April 1945. The project survived the end of the war, but development work was slowed and the first of 3 prototypes was not built until late 1946. The aircraft made its maiden flight on the 11th January 1947 from Lambert Field, St. Louis, Missouri. The test pilot was Woodward Burke. During the first test flight, the aircraft demonstrated a climb rate of 9,000 feet per minute, twice the climb rate of the F-8F Barcat, the Navy unregistered trademark S primary fleet defense interceptor at the time. The Navy redesignated the aircraft as the XF-2H-1 in 1947 after it ordered a different jet fighter from Douglas, another Navy contractor that was also assigned the manufacturer's letter D. An order for 56 aircraft was placed in May 1947. Similarities to the F-H-1 meant that McDonnell was able to complete the first F-2H-1 in August 1948, a mere 3 months after the last F-H-1 rolled off the assembly line. Relative to the XF-2D1, the fuselage was extended about 12 inches forward of the wing and fuel capacity was increased by 29 gallons to 877 gallons. The empennage was slightly redesigned, reducing the size of the vertical tailplane fairing and eliminating dihedral from the horizontal stabilizers. The wing and tail thickness ratio was also reduced to increase the critical Mach number. The F-2H-1 was retrofitted with 3,150-pound forces thrust engines as they became available. Although the Navy accepted the F-2H-1, it was the more capable F-2H-2 that was most widely used. With newer Westinghouse J-34WE-34 3,250-pound forces thrust engines, it had significantly improved performance. The wing was modified and strengthened to add provisions for 200 gallons wingtip fuel tanks. Unlike the contemporary USN F-9F Panther, the Banshee's wingtip tanks were detachable. 2 armament pylons were added under each stub and outboard wing, for a total of 8, allowing the aircraft to carry a maximum stores load of 1,580 pounds, consisting of 4 250-pound bombs and 4 5-inch unguided rockets. The A-O'Neill nose gear was omitted from the F2H2 and most other subsequent Banshee variants. The F2H2 was the foundation for 3 minor variants of the Banshee. The first, the F2H2B, had strengthened wings and a strengthened inner pylon under the port side wing to allow the craft to carry a 1,650 pounds Mark 7 nuclear bomb or a 3,230 pounds Mark 8 nuclear bomb. In order to compensate for the vastly increased load, the F2H2B was fitted with stiffer landing gear struts and a pilot switchable power booster for the ailerons. The latter was necessary so pilots could control a roll to the left with a heavy Mark 8 nuclear bomb fitted on the left-hand pylon. One 20mm cannon was omitted to make room for additional electronics to arm the nuclear weapon. The F2H2N was a night fighter variant outfitted with a 2 feet 10 and longer nose that housed a Sperry Corporation ANAPS-19 radar unit. The cannons were moved rearwards in the nose to make room for the radar. One F2H2N, BU 123311, was eventually returned to McDonnell to serve as the prototype for the enlarged and enhanced F2H3 and F2H4 series. A handful of F2H2 nanoseconds retained the kneeling nose feature of the earlier F2H1. The F2H2P was a photo reconnaissance version with 6 cameras housed in a 2 feet 5 in longer nose. It was the first jet-powered reconnaissance aircraft used by the USN. Remote controls allowed the pilot to rotate the cameras in the vertical and horizontal planes, and the aircraft could be fitted with a pair of underwing pods that each contained 20 flash cartridges for night photography. The camera bay was electrically heated to prevent frost. The F2H2P was considered a valuable photo reconnaissance asset due to its long maximum range for a jet aircraft, maximum operational altitude of 48,500 feet, combined with its speed that made it extremely difficult to intercept by other combat jet aircraft of the early 1950s era. The F2H3 was the last significant alteration. The fuselage was extended by 8 feet 0 to increase internal fuel load to 1,102 gallons. The detachable wingtip fuel tanks were reduced in size to 170 gallons each, but due to the aircraft Euro unregistered trademark S increased internal fuel capacity, these tanks were seldom used in service. The horizontal stabilizers were moved from the vertical tail down to the fuselage and incorporated significant dihedral. The F2H3 was fitted with a Westinghouse ANAPQ-41 radar unit, enabling the fighter to be used for all-weather missions, and the cannons were moved downwards and rearwards away from the nose to accommodate the radar and increase ammunition capacity from 150 rounds per gun to 220 rounds for each upper gun and 250 rounds for each lower gun. Another 4 weapons pylons were added under the wings for a total of 8, and the bomb load was increased to 3,000 pounds. The F2H3 also added provisions for aerial refueling consisting of a bolt-on, readily removable refueling kit that replaced the upper port side cannon with a refueling probe. These changes resulted in a longer, larger airplane that looked significantly different from its predecessors. The last variant was the F2H4. It had a Hughes ANAPG-37 radar and slightly more powerful Westinghouse J-34WE-38 3,600-pound forces thrust engines that increased top speed by 30 miles per hour and dramatically increased the aircraft to Euro unregistered trademark S service ceiling to 56,000 feet. The F2H4 was otherwise similar to the F2H3. A proposed F2H3P photo reconnaissance variant was cancelled before reaching production. Unlike many other early jet fighters, no 2-seat version was ever produced. A proposal to increase the aircraft to Euro unregistered trademark S speed by adding afterburners was cancelled after a test aircraft suffered extensive damage to the wing roots and tail structure when the afterburners were actuated. A much faster swept-wing version of the Banshee was cancelled before it left the drawing boards. Production ended on September 24, 1953 after a total of 895 aircraft were delivered. The F2H-3 and F2H-4 were given the new designations F2C and F2D respectively under the 1962 Unified Designation System. The designations F2A and F2B presumably referred to the F2H-1 and F2H-2, but these variants had already been withdrawn from service. No Banshees ever flew under the new designations. The last ones in USNR service were placed in storage before the new designations went into effect. Operational history United States Navy and Marine Corps The F2H-2 served during the Korean War with the U.S. Navy Task Force 77 and the Marine Corps. Pilots spoke of F2H as the Banjo. Due to its good performance at high altitude, it initially proved its worth as an escort for long-range USAF bomber formations. As the war progressed, USN and USMC fighters were primarily assigned to ground attack missions, including close air support of ground troops and destruction of the North Korean Army's supply lines. The North Korean Air Forces had been almost completely annihilated during the opening weeks of the war by the combined US and UK Far East Air Force, mostly due to the far superior training and World War II combat experience of the US and Commonwealth pilots. From that point onwards, the combined North Korean, Chinese, and Soviet forces were unable to open new airstrips near the combat zones in South Korea because of constant FEAF airstrikes, forcing them to operate out of air bases in China. The Banshee and other USN fighters had limited exposure to hostile enemy aircraft because they operated far out of the range of enemy fighters operating from China. Air-to-air combat missions, such as patrols in the Yalu River area, were primarily assigned to F-86 Sabres. Consequently, the Banshee would score no victories nor suffer any losses in air-to-air combat, although 3 F-2H-2s were lost to anti-aircraft gunfire. The F-2H-2P also made a great contribution to the Korean War, particularly in USMC service. At the time of the war, accurate surface-to-air missiles had not yet been developed, the vast majority of enemy aircraft did not have onboard radar, and the speed of newer jets was rapidly making AAA guns obsolete. Air defense tactics still largely depended on being able to see the enemy, and U.S. commanders soon discovered that a lone high-flying F-2H-2P was almost impossible for ground forces to spot, much less shoot down. The aircraft was soon in very high demand for the invaluable battlefield photography it could provide. F-2H-2 picoseconds even received USAF fighter escorts when operating in areas frequented by enemy fighters. Despite being deployed constantly throughout the war, only 2 F-2H-2 picoseconds were lost to radar-directed AAA gunfire, with no air-to-air losses. In the late 1940s, the USN had resisted the novel swept-wing design concept, fearing that the tricky low-speed handling displayed by early swept-wing airplanes would make it unsafe to operate them from aircraft carriers. Unfortunately, the USN failed to fully appreciate how much this would hamper the performance of its new jets. As a consequence of its unswept wings, the Banshee was almost 100 miles per hour slower than new Soviet jet fighters such as the Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-15, a serious handicap in air-to-air combat. As further testing proved that swept-wing aircraft could be flown safely at low speeds, development of new swept-wing USN fighters began. The USN deployed the new radar-equipped F-2H-3 and F-2H-4 for all-weather fleet defense after the conclusion of the Korean War, but only as a stopgap measure until the much faster F-9F Cougar, F-3H Demon, and F-4D Skyray could be deployed in significant numbers. Later variants of the Banshee served for only a few years on the front lines and saw no action. Similarly, the F-2H-2P was superseded by the F-9F-8P variant of the F-9F Cougar and the F-81P variant of the F-8U Crusader as these faster aircraft became available. In 1954, a Banshee flew coast-to-coast, non-stop without refueling, approximately 1,900 miles from NAS Los Alamitos, California to NAS Cecil Field, Florida, in approximately 4 hours. During the Korean War, the U.S. was concerned about a general war in Europe involving the Soviet Union and the total lack of intelligence on that country, in particular the location of airfields. The U.S. Navy devised a plan named Operation Steve Brody, where 4 F2H-2P photo reconnaissance Banshees would launch from a carrier cruising on routine maneuvers off the northeast coast of Greece and fly north photographing the landmass of Russia bordering the Black Sea. In May 1952, the U.S. Navy presented the plan to Secretary of Defense Robert Lovett, with the request that he take it to President Harry Truman. Lovett refused, effectively canceling the operation. Later, in 1955, there was another crisis involving the possible invasion of Taiwan by Communist China. Marine Banshees were chosen for secret overflights of areas where the Communist Chinese would be preparing such an invasion. Unlike the purposed photo flights over the Soviet Union in 1952, these missions were escorted by other Marine Banshee fighters based in South Korea. 27 missions took place without incident. Surviving examples are located on display in private collections and at several naval air stations and Marine Corps air stations in the United States, including 2 examples on display at the National Museum of Naval Aviation at Naval Air Station Pensacola, Florida and 1 example at the Flying Leatherneck Aviation Museum at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, California. Royal Canadian Navy . In 1951, the RCN expressed interest in replacing their obsolete Hawker Sea Furies with Banshees, drafting a $40 million deal for 60 new aircraft. Unfortunately, due to fiscal wrangling in the Canadian cabinet, the purchase was not approved until after Banshee production had been shut down in 1953. The RCN was forced to acquire second-hand USN aircraft, 39 at a cost of $25 million. The aircraft were delivered from 1955 to 1958, and flew from HMCS Bonaventure or as NORAD interceptors from shore bases. In order to improve the Banshee's capabilities as a long-range interceptor, the RCN equipped the aircraft with the AIM-9 Sidewinder missile. The RCN conducted sea trials of the Sidewinder in November 1959, during which several remotely piloted drone aircraft were shot down. The Banshee, although initially well liked by its Canadian pilots for its flying qualities, began to suffer from problems in RCN service. A Banshee and its pilot were lost after an in-flight structural failure of the folding wing mechanism, and another Banshee suffered an apparent brake failure aboard Bonaventure and rolled off the carrier's deck, falling into the ocean and drowning its pilot. The RCN would eventually lose 12 of its original 39 Banshees to accidents, a loss rate of over 30%. Utilization of the Banshees fell as the RCN shifted its primary focus to anti-submarine warfare. Bonaventure was too small to accommodate many Banshees while carrying a sufficient number of CS-2F trackers to conduct around-the-clock ASW patrols, so the carrier frequently left port with no Banshees aboard. Furthermore, the Canadian military was coming under increasing political pressure to cut its budget, and the increasingly obsolescent Banshees were becoming expensive to maintain as years of punishing carrier service and the harsh North Atlantic climate took their toll. The last RCN Banshees were retired without replacement in September 1962. They were the only jet-powered carrier-based fighters ever deployed by the RCN. Banshees were the primary aircraft of the short-lived RCN Grey Ghosts aerobatic team. The team's name was a play on the Banshee name and the RCN color scheme. The RCN's Banshee fleet was too small to maintain a special contingent of aircraft for air show service, so the team simply flew whichever active-duty Banshees were available at the time of each show. 3 of the former RCN Banshees survive today, 126,464 at the Canada Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa, Ontario, 126,402 at the Shearwater Aviation Museum at CFB Shearwater in the Halifax Regional Municipality, Nova Scotia, 126,334 in the Naval Museum of Alberta Gallery of the Military Museums in Calgary, Alberta. The remaining RCN Banshees were cut up for scrap or destroyed as practice targets. Variants: XF2H1, prototype aircraft, 3 built. F2H1, single-seat fighter version, 2 3,000-pound Forces Westinghouse J34WE22 turbojet engines. Initial production version, 56 built. F2H2, improved version with detachable wingtip fuel tanks, 8 underwing weapons pylons for 1,580 pounds stores capability, 3,250 pound forces Westinghouse J34WE34 turbojet engines. Second production version, 308 built. F2H2B, single-seat fighter bomber version, strengthened portside weapons pylon for 3,230 pounds Mark 8 nuclear bomb, 25 built. F2H2N, single-seat night fighter version with APS-19 radar housed in lengthened nose, 14 built. F2H2P, single-seat photo reconnaissance version with lengthened nose housing 6 cameras, 89 built. F2H3, single-seat all-weather fighter version, lengthened fuselage, redesigned tail, increased fuel capacity, 8 underwing weapons pylons for 3,000 pounds bomb load, APQ-41 radar and enlarged nose. 250 built. Redesignated as F2C in 1962. F2H3P, proposed photo reconnaissance version of the F2H3. Not built. F2H4, improved all-weather fighter version, 3,600 pound forces thrust Westinghouse J34WE38 turbojet engines, APG-37 radar, otherwise similar to F2H3. Final production version, 150 built. Redesignated as F2D in 1962. F2H5, unofficial designation for a proposed swept-wing version with the wings, tail and afterburners of McDonnell's XF-88 Voodoo. Not built. Operators, Canada, Royal Canadian Navy, VF-870, VF-871, VX-10. United States, United States Navy, VX-3, VF-11, VF-12, VF-22, VF-23, VF-31, VF-41, VF-52C Lancers, VF-62, VF-92, VF-101, VF-114, VF-141, VF-152, VF-171, VF-172, VC-3, VC-4, VC-61, VC-62. United States Marine Corps VMF-114, VMF-122, VMF-214, VMF-224, VMF-N-533, VMJ-1, VMJ-2. Aircraft on display. Canada F2H3, BU 126,334, The Military Museums, in Calgary, Alberta. BU 126,402, Shearwater Aviation Museum in Shearwater, Nova Scotia. BU 126,464, Canada Aviation Museum in Ottawa, Ontario. United States F2H2, BU 124,988, Flying Leatherneck Aviation Museum, MCAS Miramar, California. BU 125,052, USS Lexington Museum, Corpus Christi, Texas. BU 127,693, NAS Oceana Air Park at NAS Oceana, Virginia. F2H2P, BU 125,690, Palmer Air and Space Museum, adjacent to Davis-Monthan AFB in Tucson, Arizona. BU 126,673, National Naval Aviation Museum at NAS Pensacola, Florida. BU 128,885, Howell Park in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. F2H4, BU 126,419, National Naval Aviation Museum at NAS Pensacola, Florida. Specifications. Data from McDonnell Douglas aircraft since 1920, combat aircraft since 1945 except as noted, general characteristics, crew, 1, length, 48 feet 2 inches, wingspan, 41 feet 9 in, height, 14 feet 6 in, wing area, 294 FTA squared, empty weight, 13,183 pounds, Loaded weight, 21,013 pounds, max takeoff weight, 25,214 pounds, power plant, Tour, Westinghouse J34WE34 turbojets, 3,250 pound-forces each, performance, maximum speed, 580 miles per hour. At sea level, cruise speed, 461 miles per hour, range, 1,716 miles, service ceiling, 46,600 feet, rate of climb, 6,000 feet per minute from sea level, armament, guns, 4 20 mm Colt Mk16 cannon, 220 rounds gun, 250 rounds gun, rockets, 8 60 pounds high explosive rockets or 6 500 pounds bombs and 2 60 pounds HE rockets. Missiles, 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. Popular culture, the aircraft played a central role in the 1953 James A. Michaner novel The Bridges at Tokari. The subsequent 1955 movie of the same name used F-9F Panthers in place of Banshees for all flight sequences, although parked Banshees are visible in the background of several scenes. See also, related development, McDonnell F2H Phantom, aircraft of comparable role, configuration and era, Grumman F-9F Panther, de Havilland Sea Venom, Hawker Sea Hawk, related lists, list of fighter aircraft, list of military aircraft of the United States, list of military aircraft of the United States. References. Notes Bibliography External links, The Banshee on YouTube, RCN Banshee 126402 at Shearwater Aviation Museum.